Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next edition of PGTips. I'm Gary in Stockholm.
Hi, everybody. I'm Paul in Barnsley. So good to see you all again. We've done a couple of these episodes, Gary, haven't we, about hitting a creative block, getting unstuck if you're feeling a little bit jaded. In the past, we've mentioned about if you need inspiration with your characters. I presented some tips because I hit a creative block at one point. So I explained how I managed to get over it and around it. But you've also got an interesting set of ideas for getting unstuck.
Yeah, sure. First, I thought maybe we could just talk a little bit about some of the reasons that we get stuck, and then see how we can sort of break through them. So these are more like, let's say, an inner growth approach as opposed to necessarily a practical approach. But then we'll use some examples from the kids' book lexicon to just sort of kind of back up some of the stuff. The first thing is perfectionism. um, Many of us feel that, if something's not good enough, then we just stop and don't continue doing it. And that is one of those things that I know a lot of creatives suffer from, because they feel like, oh, that's not good enough. It's got to be better. And there's definitely a process to work towards. I mean, you want things to be as good as possible, of course. But this idea of perfectionism is one of those things that comes up. Have you experienced the perfectionist kind of thing?
I definitely recognize that. And it's good with retrospect, looking back. I realize you're going to have that all the time. I think part of at the worst sense, I think I'm a little bit lazy or idle. A better term might say I'm impatient. I want the better work now. But you're going to experiment. You're going to do things that you're not quite happy with. So you can't hit perfectionism straight away. Maybe like playing darts. If you're playing dart, you can't expect to get 3 bullseyes in a row. Just you need practice. So yeah, perfectionism is something that we need to be. If you're aware of it, I think you can cope with it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, the playing darts thing. I mean, there's a practice, and then even the best players in the world aren't hitting 100% of the time, right? So there's a process. I think of the idea of when we're working creatively, especially if I'm working on a project with clients, and that is that it's a series of approximations. So and one of the great things about working with clients, of course, is that you have specific deadlines that you have to hit. So regardless of how far you think you've gotten done, you know that on Tuesday at 12 o'clock, you're going to send something. And if you don't send it, then pretty much the job's over for you, right? So you start to work towards that. And it's the series of approximations as close as you could possibly get at that particular time. And that can help to drive the process of perfectionism.
There's an inner clock, I think, when you're working freelance like that. You know how much time you need to reach that end point. But when we're working on something for ourselves, unless it is a contract with a publisher and you have got a tight deadline, but if you're working on something that is open-ended, it's sometimes difficult to deal with. It can go on and on. When is something finished? When is something good enough? You might get good enough fairly early on in the process, but as I said, you need to work through. Don't feel you have to be perfect.
Exactly. The second one is the idea of burnout. And for a lot of people who are in the kids' book world, especially as you're building a career, you tend to be doing a lot of things, like having, like, let's say, a normal job or teaching or working somewhere else, and then you're kind of adding in your work until you can kind of make a breakthrough. And that can sometimes lead to burnout, where you feel that where you just don't have enough time. And to remember that it's okay to take a break, and just try to be consistent, but at the same time make sure that you're taking a break and you're giving yourself the resources that you need. And that kind of balance isn't so easy to make.
I think working freelance as well, I sometimes have had the luxury, rather than burning out on one job, I will have 3 concurrent different jobs going on at the same time, if the time allows. And then you can put like a different hat on working on the next job. And it does give you a little bit of a fresh boost to be working on that. That's one way
Yeah.
I've put with it in the past. And I can look back at commercial jobs and disappoints me that I remember, yeah, I was a little bit burnt out on that. That wasn't my best. And I recognize it because I was probably a bit exhausted and I needed that kind of break that you're talking about.
Yeah, and one of the things that we tend to forget about is our, let's say, physical health. For me, that's an important thing to remember, and I tend to do that too. As soon as like the projects pile in, then I'm like, oh, I don't have time to exercise, or I don't have time to eat properly, and that's exactly the wrong way in the way to lead to burnout. So just so we're aware of that.
Yep.
Um, the next one on my little list of why we get stuck is this idea of self-doubt. And this is a really tricky one because there's this kind of balance between self-confidence and continuing to do your work and the feedback that you get. So, we both see a lot of times people on the Kids Book Facebook group saying, I sent out my work to, 100 different agents and I got zero response, so I'm terrible, and there's so many reasons why agents and publishers make decisions about what they're going to take in. And they can vary from everything from, of course, the quality of the work, but also, what they want in their publication list, what the market is saying at that particular moment. So it's natural to have self-doubt, but it's important to keep working towards something that you just feel is worthwhile for you.
Yeah. I think we see examples of people who are successful, but their backstory is that they had the self-doubt, like the example of submitting to publishers or agents. They may have submitted to tens, 20, some over 100 sometimes before being picked up. So timing plays a huge part in that, being at the right place at the right time with the right publisher. But that self-doubt, again, it's being aware of it. So if you're just starting out in the business, you can't stand back and get an objective view about this and realize that self-doubt is part of it. The imposter syndrome is part of this career that we've chosen, and recognizing that and realizing, yeah, that's just another stage in getting to where I want to get. I think that's important. And when we move on to some examples of how we can overcome this, I think that will answer that question.
Exactly. So some of the ways that we can overcome these things. The first is to change your environment. And for me, that might be going out in nature, going for a walk or a run. For you, it might be going down to the pool or going for a bike ride. And for other people, it might be something, completely different. It's super important to just change your environment sometimes if you feel like you're kind of too stuck in this kind of, I'm not good enough, I don't have enough time, all those kind of things. Just change your environment and then come back, give yourself a new perspective.
Especially true when you mentioned exercising earlier, because my break and my change of environment is to get out on the mountain bike. And physical exercise, healthy exercise, but it also does free up the mind. You can look back at some of the problems. In fact, I sometimes set off on the bike thinking, right, today I'm going to address A, B, and C that I've been dealing with. And you get a fresh perspective on this. It might be going out to visit an exhibition, see other people's work. Sometimes that can be a little bit daunting, thinking, oh yeah, look, there's all this successful work, or going to a bookshop and think, all these books have been published. But then it gives you an idea that this is the marketplace. There's a space for me in here somewhere. So yeah, change environment, give yourself a break.
Yeah, totally. And that just leads me to think about one book that's helped me a lot, and it's called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And she has a few different kind of, let's say, things that you can do. And one of them is to make an artist date. And the artist date is with yourself. And exactly that, to go to like a museum on your own and just feel inspired. Um, and that's like a big part of this kind of, change perspective. So I definitely think that that's one of those things that can really help to open up the door.
I've not heard of that one, so you have to flash that book up on screen and we'll have a
I
look at it.
will. I'll flash that up there. The second of the strategies that we could use is set small, achievable goals. So when we break things down into smaller tasks, we can start to build momentum. This kind of like this small goal process is also something that's become kind of popular now, with this idea of micro habits, mini meditations, mindfulness. All these things can blend together right now. But actually, there is research, and is also enough support to back up the idea that the smaller that we can make something and the more achievable we can make it, the better, not only for momentum, but also these things add up over time. So in the same way that, let's say, if you're going to do push-ups or something, you might start with one, and then eventually you can do 50, but it's a crazy expectation to think I'm going to do 50 when I don't do any. And the same way is true with our art, even though it doesn't feel necessarily like something so physical. If we do one sentence, one picture, one line, whatever it might be, and start to build that up over time, it will eventually lead to an increase in your facility and creativity, but it will also actually add up to have something to show, right? So those things help a lot.
I like that idea because I work by lists. I like to make lists. So if you list down some goals and targets that you're going to achieve, break it down into smaller portions. And I bet there's some positivity about I don't know if it's serotonin, you get a little boost every time you think, right, I've done that. That's a feel-good factor. So rather than waiting for the end, that might be frustrating, you can have a series of little boosts and feel-good factors. Because writers set themselves goals of so many words per day, don't they?
Yeah.
Easy for illustrators like us to set ourselves a goal for a sketch a day that's maybe even removed from the work that we're doing, or even do that with the
Yeah.
people that you're on with.
Yeah, and there are a lot of online, things like the Inktober and things like that that can help you to, help you to sort of, get in the habit of that. I made this book, illustrated this book for with all the yoga positions in it, and there's like a lot, hundreds of them. And the way that I did it was I just did one pose per night, and after whatever, and then some days it was two or three because I got into it. And then after 2 months, I had all the material for a book, and I didn't even really try. It was just like sitting in front of the TV, thinking, "Oh, I'm going to do this pose," So it was a relaxing kind of activity, and that's exactly the kind of thing that can help us with our other stuff.
When I've been a bit fed up or jaded, I've always got a sketchbook with me, and I just thought, right, I'll just do an animal alphabet in one
All
go,
right.
not like A today, B tomorrow, but I did animal alphabet one day. I think I just about got through all 26, and then another day you could choose like something from nature, like more like plants and trees. And as you said, once you start it, if it appeals to you, you do get into it. And I could see that the drawings were developing and they were a little bit more spontaneous as I got through. So, and I know a lot of people do warm-up drawings in the morning before they actually start, just to like warm up the senses and the muscles and the brain response. So all these things that can be a benefit. Any more tips?
Yeah, there I have a couple more here. One other one that I think is really big, and there are basically two parts to this. It's collaboration, both collaborating with someone else to make a work. So, for instance, if you're a writer, you might be teaming up with an illustrator, and that's like a very clear distinction. But also, like in the music world, for instance, a lot of people are collaborating. So they're both musicians and they're collaborating on one piece. As illustrators, we tend not to do that, but in many other visual art forms, we're doing that in film, and we could easily do it in illustration as well. There's no reason why we don't do that. There are a few examples. I know that some people like Oliver Jeffers and a few of his friends got together and did this kind of book where they send off like their one sketch, and then it arrives in the post. This was like a while ago, and then they add to that, and then they send it around. But there are other examples where people have collaborated on illustrative work as well. So that's something to think about, both in terms of writing, but also illustration.
I've done that kind of thing when we've been like picture book retreat or on some other set course, but not just out of our own interest. Maybe we should try that. Maybe we'll do a page each and send it to each other. and then we can report back.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a great idea because so that would be like a collaboration because that leads me on to the second part of this collaboration. It's collaborative play.
Mm.
It's very easy to agree to a collaborative play, and that's exactly what you're suggesting, something you might do in a workshop. You could even do, like I draw one circle and then you add to that. Like when with the kids, you sort of they draw a shape and then you turn it into a character or something, right? Or they turn it into the character and you draw the shape. Could go either way. That collaborative play can also help us, kind of professionally as well, because it opens up new perspectives. You see how someone else is creating something from something that you're part of.
Yeah,
So it can be really fun to do, and also then it could be also like lead to a collaborative project, right? Which is the first part of that. Both are good. So
yeah,
it's
'cause I
something
think
to think about.
1 + 1 might equal more than 2. We might come out with something much better than either of us would have imagined. Yeah, and it takes off that pressure, like you first spoke about, the pressure of success and being perfect. This is play. This is
Yeah.
fun. Get that spontaneity back into it. Right, we shall report back on that and see what we come up with.
All right, good. Another one comes from the Artist Way, and this is these. It's called Morning Pages, and Julia Cameron talks about this. That it's probably the most fundamental part of their process, and what it is journaling, basically, stream of consciousness, where you set out in the morning and you write longhand your pages without sort of stopping and without referring back to anything, because the idea is that you're just getting out stuff and getting the flow going. Can also do this artistically, like you said, the morning warm up with the sketches can even be just, moving the body and creating some kind of um, motion that can then lead to other work as you go through the day. So this idea of like doing something, that stream of consciousness, is not meant to be good or anything. It's just meant to sort of get the flow going. Can be super good way to warm up in the morning.
I know our friend Claire Bell has said how useful that is, and she's led a couple of courses on that. She did it at Picture Book Retreat, except she got up at a crazy hour for me. It was much too early for me. Being an organizer down there, I needed more sleep time, but they were up early, and there was a good dozen of them. And I like
Mm,
the idea of, like you said, stream of consciousness. If I pick up a sketchbook and start drawing, I'll probably go to things I've done before and develop them. But not being a writer first and foremost, if I write a stream of consciousness, I'm sure that will be completely fresh, different and new. So yeah, that, and I know writers probably wouldn't be tempted to illustrate, but they could do like little stick people drawings just to forget the words and
yeah.
develop something in shapes and images. Yeah, that's another
Yeah,
one
definitely.
I want to try.
And so I guess for to wrap up, there are a few examples from picture books. Of course, there are hundreds of them that we could choose from. I just thought of a couple that were directly related to the idea of getting unstuck. One is this Peter Reynolds, The Dot. What can you create with just one dot? And that's literally, you open that book and there's a dot, and then all the different things that you could create and do and develop from that. So that's just one tiny example. There's another one called Press Hair, right, which is another dot. So there are quite a few of these kind of like creativity open books for kids, and there's no reason why we can't play the same game as adults, right? So don't be afraid to just jump in and try something that's meant for a kid. Another one is this Barney Salzberg beautiful oops, and it's like oops, we tend to call it something like happy accidents, like the typical thing for an adult illustrator is the coffee stain, right? And then you turn it into something. But we can do it purposefully as well. We can just throw something out there on the canvas or on paper or whatever, and then see what can be developed from it. It's something that's really interesting to do and to try. One thing you could do, for instance, if you're working digitally, is you just take like a big old fat paintbrush and you just zing it onto your uh, iPad or whatever you're using, and then from there draw a character, right? And this is just kind of warm up stuff because you can get interesting shapes
Mm.
even digitally, so it doesn't have to be necessarily physical activity to create some oops moments that then can lead you to a little bit more spontaneity and openness.
Yeah.
A lot
Getting
of times, actually, yeah, go ahead.
I was saying getting out of your comfort zone, doing everything as you normally do is so important. So that's a few ways that we can do that.
Another thing is, like Jean-Michel Basquiat, there's a book about him in his life, but one of the things that's interesting is to play with this idea of montage, of pulling different elements together, and not being afraid of, like, cutting and pasting, or uh, painting on a wall, or whatever it might be, to just change your environment, and to get out there and be inspired by what's around you. I think that's like super, super important. Sometimes it's important to start from the inner world, and sometimes it's important to just feel the kind of stuff that's coming in from the outside, and to then take it and use it and reconfigure it into something interesting.
Mm. Be open to everything.
Yeah, exactly. Open and curious.
I was interested to
Um,
see a video of Oliver Jeffers working, and he was standing up at a huge worktop, quite untidy, busy, creative, loads of piles of everything around him, and he was in the middle of it all. And I thought, yeah, I sit most often just at a desk, sketchbook, paper, and a light box or whatever. And comparing the two, that feels just that little bit controlled and restrictive. So I have tried to work slightly bigger sometimes, and not always sat down. I know you sometimes have got a different seating position, or didn't you say you sometimes can recline while?
so yeah. So if I'm, like, let's say, writing, or if I'm going to be working digitally, I'm using my iPad, and then I basically make myself, like, from cushions and stuff, make myself a chaise lounge, if you want to call it that, because I feel like this idea of sitting with your head bent is really bad for your back and body. And it's also, once you get into that position where you're not thinking about how you feel in your body and you're totally relaxed, then you can just go into it. It's like becomes more meditative. So for me, it's definitely finding a position where I really am comfortable, and it's not always obvious. And then as soon as it's funny, because as soon as you build this thing with cushions or whatever, if you leave it for a second, that's exactly where the kids go or whatever. Everyone wants that because it is, like, not already available, and yet if you create that environment for yourself, that's the kind of comfortable position. So yeah, definitely create a place either that's super comfortable or that's dynamic. I think that's what you're saying, like, be dynamic, use your body a lot more.
We've had a summer house built this summer, and there was an old one before. I used to like to go down in there, get settled down, quiet, peaceful, maybe some relaxing music on, and I could think to write. And now, when I want to do that kind of work, I go back there because I've already got that memory that I can relax into this environment and do that kind of thing. So I can look at a drawing and think, oh, yeah, that's when I was in such and such a position. Or so just being in that perfect, comfortable position that's going to be creative and allow you to work is just as
Yeah,
important as everything else that we've mentioned today.
exactly. And yeah, many of us have seen those kind of the little house, the Roald doll house, right? Where he sits in the back
Yeah.
garden, he's got his, like, orange chair, whatever it is, and then he's got the little place for his tea and his
Sat
papers.
in
And
that chair. I've been into his museum and I've sat in his armchair and had the drawing board across the armchair arms and sat there and his pot of freshly sharpened pencils. It did feel quite special. I think it was
yeah.
original rather than a replica in his museum.
Mm.
Yeah, so
So it's
there's a
setting that up.
huge bunch of things there that we've discussed today. I'm definitely
Yeah.
I'll start and I'll send you an illustration that you can then adapt, develop, send back to me.
All right. That sounds great.
We'll do something good.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time for the next edition of P&G Tips. Until then, have a great time being creative.
Yep. And same from me. Bye, everyone. Watch out for all our other episodes on YouTube. See you soon. Bye.